Sometimes the worst moment of your life becomes the doorway to discovering who you really are. Sarah Martinez thought she knew exactly where her life was heading when she walked into Peterson Industries that Tuesday morning. She had her coffee, her presentation notes, and absolutely no idea that in less than 2 hours, her entire world would crumble and then rebuild itself in the most extraordinary way imaginable. What started as a routine performance review would end with a Navy helicopter landing in the company parking lot, federal agents asking questions, and Sarah discovering a truth about herself that had been buried for 27 years. Because sometimes getting fired isn't the end of your story. It's the moment your real story finally begins. This is about more than workplace drama or corporate politics. This is about a woman who lost everything she thought she wanted and found everything she never knew she needed. This is about family secrets, military honor, and the kind of courage that runs so deep in your blood, you don't even know it's there until life demands you find it. Get ready for a story that proves the universe has a way of putting you exactly where you need to be, even when it feels like everything is falling apart. Sarah Martinez had always been the type of person who arrived 15 minutes early to everything. Her grandmother used to say that punctuality was a form of respect, and respect was something you gave freely or lost forever. At 27, Sarah carried those words like a compass, guiding her through a world that often felt chaotic and unpredictable. That Tuesday morning in March felt no different from any other. The spring air in downtown Seattle carried the familiar scent of coffee and possibility as Sarah walked the 6 blocks from her tiny apartment to Peterson Industries. Her heels clicked against the wet pavement in a rhythm she found comforting, each step taking her closer to a job she had worked 3 years to build into something meaningful. Peterson Industries wasn't glamorous. The 40-story building housed a mid-level consulting firm that specialized in government contracts, the kind of work that paid well enough but rarely made headlines. Sarah worked in the analysis department, spending her days reviewing proposals and creating reports that helped secure deals worth millions of dollars. She was good at her job, maybe even great at it, though she would never say so herself. The elevator hummed as it carried her to the 32nd floor. Sarah checked her reflection in the polished steel doors, smoothing a wrinkle from her navy blazer. She had learned early in her career that appearance mattered, especially for a young Latina woman trying to climb the corporate ladder. Every detail had to be perfect because there was no room for mistakes when you were already fighting against assumptions people made before you even opened your mouth. Her cubicle sat in the middle of a maze of identical workspaces, each one a small fortress of personal items and professional ambition. Sarah had decorated hers minimally. A small succulent plant that somehow thrived under fluorescent lights, a photo of her grandmother, and a wooden nameplate that had been a gift when she was promoted 2 years ago. It wasn't much, but it was hers. The morning started normally. Sarah reviewed 3 proposals for infrastructure projects, flagged 2 concerns in a defense contract analysis, and responded to emails from colleagues who always seemed to need something urgent that could have waited. She was deep in concentration, working on a complex report about supply chain optimization, when her phone buzzed with a message from her supervisor. "My office. 10 minutes. Bring your current projects." Richard Peterson III was the kind of man who had inherited his position along with his name. At 55, he carried himself with the confidence of someone who had never had to wonder if he belonged in a room. His corner office overlooked Elliott Bay, and Sarah had always suspected he spent more time watching the ferries than reviewing the work his team produced. She gathered her files, assuming this was another routine check-in. Peterson had been doing more of these lately, probably because the company had landed a major government contract that required extra oversight. Sarah had actually been hoping for more responsibility on the project. Her analysis work had been consistently strong, and she had ideas for improving their process efficiency. The elevator ride to the executive floor felt longer than usual. Sarah used the time to organize her thoughts, preparing to discuss the projects she had been managing. She had solutions for the bottlenecks in their approval process and suggestions for streamlining the review system. This could be her chance to show Peterson that she was ready for advancement. His assistant waved her toward the office without looking up from her computer. Sarah knocked twice and entered when she heard Peterson's gruff acknowledgement. He was standing behind his massive oak desk, his back turned toward her as he stared out at the water. The office smelled like expensive cologne and the kind of leather that came with furniture that cost more than most people's cars. "Sit down, Martinez." Something in his tone made Sarah's chest tighten, but she took her usual seat across from his desk. Peterson turned around slowly, his expression unreadable. He was holding a folder she didn't recognize, thick with documents that hadn't come from her department. "How long have you been with Peterson Industries?" he asked, settling into his chair. 3 years, and for months," Sarah replied, confused by the question. He knew exactly how long she had been there. He had personally approved her last 2 performance reviews. Peterson opened the folder and began shuffling through papers. Sarah caught glimpses of official letterheads and documents with government seals, but she couldn't read the details from where she sat. Her heart started beating faster, though she couldn't pinpoint why. "And in that time, would you say you've been completely honest with us about your background?" The question hit Sarah like cold water. "I don't understand what you mean." Peterson's eyes narrowed. "Your application, your references, your family history. All completely accurate." Sarah felt heat rising in her cheeks. "Of course, I would never lie on application." "Interesting." Peterson pulled out a single sheet of paper and placed it face down on the desk between them. "Because we've recently discovered some information that suggests otherwise." The silence stretched between them like a taut wire. Sarah's mind raced through every detail of her application, every form she had filled out, every background check she had passed. There was nothing to hide because there was nothing to find. She had been raised by her grandmother after her parents died in a car accident when she was 2. She had worked her way through college, graduated with honors, and built her career step by step with nothing but determination and hard work. "Mr. Peterson, I think there's been some kind of mistake." He flipped over the paper. It was a photocopy of what looked like a military document, stamped with official seals and marked with security classifications. Sarah's name was highlighted in yellow, along with words she didn't understand. "Classified, need to know, family notification restricted." "This came to us through official channels," Peterson said, his voice taking on a hardness that Sarah had never heard before. "Apparently, your family has some connections that you failed to mention during your hiring process." Sarah stared at the document, trying to make sense of what she was seeing. Her grandmother had never mentioned anything about military connections. There were no family secrets, no hidden histories. Her entire life had been transparent and ordinary. "I don't know what this is," she said honestly. "I've never seen this before." Peterson leaned back in his chair, studying her face as if looking for cracks in her story. "The thing is, Martinez, we handle sensitive government contracts here. Security clearances, classified information, the works. When someone with undisclosed family connections to military operations gets access to that information, it creates problems. But I don't have any family connections to military operations. According to this document, you do. And according to our legal department, having an employee with undisclosed security risks violates our contract with the federal government." Peterson closed the folder with a sharp snap. "Which means we have a problem." Sarah's hands were shaking now. She gripped the arms of her chair, trying to steady herself. "Mr. Peterson, I swear to you, I have no idea what that document is about. My grandmother raised me. She worked as a seamstress. There's no military connection." "Maybe you believe that," Peterson said, standing up from his chair. "But belief doesn't change facts. And the fact is, you've put this company at risk." The words hit Sarah like physical blows. 3 years of building her career, of proving herself, of working overtime and weekends to show that she belonged here. And it was all falling apart because of some document she had never seen about connections she didn't know existed. "What are you saying?" she asked, though she already knew. Peterson walked to his office door and opened it. "I'm saying you're terminated, effective immediately." Security will escort you to collect your personal items. Sarah felt the world tilt sideways. You can't be serious. Dead serious. This company cannot afford to have employees with questionable backgrounds, especially not when we're bidding for contracts worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Peterson's voice was cold, businesslike, as if he were discussing quarterly reports instead of destroying her life. Your final paycheck will be mailed to your address on file. Two security guards appeared in the doorway, as if they had been waiting in the hallway. Sarah recognized them both, Jim and Marcus, men who had always greeted her politely when she worked late. Now they wouldn't meet her eyes. "This is insane," Sarah said, standing up so quickly that her chair rolled backward. "You're firing me because of a document I've never seen about family connections I don't have." "I'm protecting this company," Peterson replied. "Something you should have done by being honest about your background from the beginning." The elevator ride down to her floor passed in a blur of humiliation and disbelief. Sarah's co-workers stared as the security guards flanked her while she packed her few personal items into a cardboard box. The succulent plant looked somehow ridiculous now, a reminder of how naive she had been to think she could put down roots here. Her hands moved automatically, placing the photo of her grandmother into the box next to the nameplate that now felt like a cruel joke. Around her, conversations stopped and started again in whispers. By tomorrow, everyone would know that Sarah Martinez had been fired for security reasons, and the story would probably grow more dramatic with each retelling. The walk to the elevator felt like a funeral procession. Sarah carried her box of belongings while Jim and Marcus maintained their professional silence behind her. She wanted to scream, to demand answers, to make someone understand that this was all a terrible mistake. Instead, she focused on putting one foot in front of the other and maintaining what was left of her dignity. The lobby was busy with the usual morning traffic of employees arriving for work and visitors checking in for appointments. Sarah kept her head down, praying she wouldn't run into anyone she knew. The last thing she needed was to explain why she was leaving with a security escort and a cardboard box. Outside, the March morning that had seemed so full of possibility an hour ago now felt cold and hostile. The security guards waited until she was clear of the building before turning back toward the entrance. Sarah stood on the sidewalk, holding her box and watching people hurry past on their way to jobs they still had. Her phone buzzed with a text message from her friend Maria, asking if she wanted to grab lunch later to celebrate Sarah's latest project success. Sarah stared at the message for a long moment before typing back, "Can today." Something came up. The walk home felt endless. Sarah's apartment was only 6 blocks away, but each step felt like she was moving further from the life she had built and into something unknown and frightening. Her neighbors were at work, her friends were at work, and the whole world seemed to be moving forward while she stood still, holding a cardboard box full of the fragments of her professional life. Inside her apartment, Sarah set the box on her small kitchen table and stared at it. 3 years of her career reduced to a succulent plant, a photo, and a nameplate. She thought about calling her grandmother, but what would she say? How do you explain that you've been fired for having family secrets that you don't even know about? Instead, Sarah made coffee and sat at her kitchen table, staring at the document that Peterson had showed her. She had managed to glimpse enough details to remember some of the words, and now she tried to piece together what she had seen. Her name, definitely. Something about military classifications and family notifications, security clearances, and restricted access. None of it made sense. Her grandmother, Elena Martinez, had worked her whole life in textile factories and alteration shops. She had raised Sarah alone after her parents died, working double shifts to pay for school clothes and supplies. There had never been money for luxuries, never any mention of military service or government connections. Sarah opened her laptop and started searching online for information about her family name and military records. She found thousands of Martinez families with military connections, but nothing that seemed related to her own history. Public records showed her grandmother's employment history, her parents' death certificates, and her own academic records, but nothing that explained the document Peterson had shown her. As the hours passed, Sarah's shock began to transform into something else: determination. If there were family secrets that were destroying her career, she needed to know what they were. If someone had made a mistake with her background check, she needed to prove it. And if Peterson Industries thought they could destroy her life without explanation, they were about to learn that Sarah Martinez didn't give up easily. She picked up her phone and dialed her grandmother's number. Elena answered on the second ring, her voice warm and familiar despite the static from her old phone. "Mija, what a nice surprise. Shouldn't you be at work?" Sarah closed her eyes, trying to find the right words. "Abuela, I need to ask you about something. About our family history." There was a pause that seemed to stretch longer than it should have. When Elena spoke again, her voice was quieter, more careful. "What kind of family history?" "Military connections, government work, anything that might be classified or restricted." Sarah was grasping for words to describe something she didn't understand. "Someone showed me a document today with my name on it, talking about security clearances and family notifications." The silence on the other end of the line was so complete that Sarah wondered if the call had been dropped. She was about to say hello when her grandmother's voice came back, changed in a way that made Sarah's chest tighten with anxiety. "Sarah, where are you right now?" "At home." "Abuela, what's going on?" "Stay there. Don't go anywhere. Don't talk to anyone else about this." "I'm coming over." The line went dead. Sarah stared at her phone, more confused than ever. Her grandmother lived 45 minutes away by bus, which meant she wouldn't arrive until well into the afternoon. But something in Elena's voice had carried an urgency that Sarah had never heard before, a weight that suggested this conversation would change everything. Sarah spent the rest of the morning pacing her apartment and trying to make sense of a day that had started so normally and turned so surreal. She had been fired from a job she loved because of family connections she didn't know existed. Her grandmother, who had always been open about their family's humble history, was suddenly speaking in careful, measured tones that suggested hidden knowledge. When a knock came at her door just after 2 o'clock, Sarah rushed to answer it. But instead of her grandmother's familiar face, she found herself looking at a woman in a crisp navy uniform, holding an official-looking envelope and wearing an expression of professional sympathy. "Ms. Martinez," the woman said, "I'm Lieutenant Commander Rodriguez from the Navy Personnel Command. We need to talk." Sarah stared at the woman in the Navy uniform, her mind struggling to process this latest impossible development. Lieutenant Commander Rodriguez was tall and composed, with graying hair pulled back in a regulation bun and eyes that seemed to take in every detail of Sarah's apartment in a single glance. "I think there's been some mistake," Sarah said, her voice sounding strange in her own ears. "I don't have any connection to the Navy." Lieutenant Commander Rodriguez's expression softened slightly. "May I come in? This conversation requires privacy." Sarah stepped aside, her hands trembling as she closed the door. The officer moved with military precision into the small living room, her eyes scanning the modest furniture and personal photos that suddenly felt exposed under such scrutiny. "Please sit down," Rodriguez said gently. "I know this must be confusing." Sarah remained standing, her arms crossed defensively. "Confusing doesn't begin to cover it. I was fired from my job this morning because of some military document with my name on it. Now you're here, and I still don't understand what's happening." Rodriguez opened the envelope she carried and pulled out a thick folder. "Ms. Martinez, what I'm about to tell you is going to be difficult to hear. Your grandmother should be here for this conversation, but circumstances have forced us to accelerate our timeline." "What circumstances? What timeline?" Sarah's voice was rising. "I called my grandmother an hour ago, and she's on her way here. Why don't you tell me what's going on?" The officer placed the folder on Sarah's coffee table and opened it carefully. Inside were photographs, documents, and what appeared to be official military records dating back decades. Sarah caught glimpses of her grandmother's name on several pages. Elena Martinez was not just a seamstress, Sarah. She was Lieutenant Elena Vasquez of the United States Navy, assigned to Special Operations Command from 1970 to 1995. Her work was classified at the highest levels. Sarah felt her legs give out, and she sank onto her couch. That's impossible. My grandmother worked in factories. She showed me her pay stubs, her employment records. Those were her cover employment. Elena was what we call a deep cover operative, embedded in civilian life while conducting intelligence operations for the Navy. Rodriguez pulled out a black and white photograph of a young woman in Navy dress uniform. The face was unmistakably Sarah's grandmother, but decades younger and wearing the confident expression of someone accustomed to command. Sarah reached for the photograph with shaking hands. I don't understand. Why would she lie to me about this? She wasn't lying exactly. She was protecting you. Elena's final mission was to assume a civilian identity and monitor potential security threats in the Pacific Northwest. Her cover story became her reality when she married your grandfather and started a family. But my grandfather died before I was born. Rodriguez nodded. Carlos Martinez was also Navy intelligence. They met during a joint operation in 1968 and were married 2 years later. Their assignment was to establish deep cover identities and operate as a normal family while gathering intelligence on foreign activities in major West Coast ports. Sarah's mind reeled as she tried to reconcile this information with everything she knew about her family. What about my parents? Were they part of this too? The officer's expression grew more somber. Your parents, David and Maria Martinez, were not involved in intelligence work. They were civilians who believed your grandmother's cover story completely. Their death in the car accident was exactly what it appeared to be, a tragedy, not an operation. Then, why did my grandmother tell me the truth after they died? I was only 2 years old. She raised me for 25 years without saying anything about this. Rodriguez leaned forward, her voice gentle but firm, because Elena's cover wasn't just a job, it was witness protection. In 1995, she testified against a network of foreign operatives who had infiltrated West Coast shipping operations. Her testimony put several dangerous people in federal prison, but it also made her a target. Sarah felt cold spreading through her chest. A target. Elena Martinez, seamstress and grandmother, was safe. Lieutenant Elena Vasquez, Navy intelligence officer, would have been killed within weeks of that trial. So the Navy gave her a choice: maintain her cover identity permanently and live a quiet civilian life, or enter formal witness protection. She chose to stay Elena Martinez. She chose to stay your grandmother, Rodriguez corrected. The Navy agreed to maintain her cover identity indefinitely, with the understanding that she would never speak of her real background, even to you. It was the only way to guarantee your safety and hers. Sarah stood up abruptly and walked to her kitchen window, staring out at the ordinary street scene below. Children were playing on the sidewalk while their parents watched from front porches. An ice cream truck played its cheerful melody in the distance. Everything looked normal, but Sarah felt like she was seeing the world through different eyes. "Why are you telling me this now?" she asked without turning around. "Because Elena's cover has been compromised," Rodriguez said quietly. 3 months ago, one of the operatives she helped convict was released from federal prison. Within weeks, someone began making inquiries about Elena Vasquez and her known associates. Sarah turned around slowly. "Someone's looking for my grandmother? Someone's been systematically investigating everyone connected to the 1995 trial. They've already approached 2 other witnesses, asking questions about Elena's whereabouts and family connections." Rodriguez pulled out another document. Yesterday, they made contact with Peterson Industries, requesting background information on their employees with Hispanic surnames. The pieces began falling into place with sickening clarity. That's why I was fired. Peterson thought I had hidden military connections because someone was investigating my family. Richard Peterson received a call from someone claiming to be a federal security investigator, asking about employees with potential ties to classified operations. When your name came up, Peterson's legal department panicked, and decided to terminate you as a liability. Sarah felt anger replacing shock. So, I lost my job because my grandmother had a secret military career that she kept hidden to protect us both. I'm afraid so. But that's not the worst of it. Rodriguez stood up and moved to the window, checking the street below with professional caution. We have reason to believe that whoever is making these inquiries has located Elena. She may be in immediate danger. What do you mean immediate danger? Elena should have arrived here an hour ago, according to her phone call to you. Our surveillance team lost contact with her 45 minutes ago when her bus was diverted due to what was reported as a traffic accident. Sarah's blood turned to ice. Are you saying someone took my grandmother? We're saying we don't know where she is, and given the circumstances, we have to assume the worst. Rodriguez turned back to face Sarah, her expression grave. Which is why I need you to come with me. Now, come with you where? Naval Air Station, Whidbey Island. Elena left detailed instructions for this scenario. If her cover was ever blown and she went missing, we were to bring you to a secure location immediately. Sarah shook her head. This is insane. I can't just disappear because my grandmother might be missing. I have to file a police report. I have to look for her. Sarah, listen to me carefully. Rodriguez's voice took on the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Elena Vasquez was one of the most effective intelligence operatives the Navy has ever produced. She spent 25 years gathering information that kept this country safe from threats most people never even know exist. The people who want to find her aren't criminals looking for revenge. They're foreign operatives trying to eliminate someone who knows too much about their ongoing activities. Foreign operatives? The network Elena helped expose in 1995 was connected to a larger operation that's still active today. Her testimony didn't just put individuals in prison. It disrupted years of intelligence gathering by hostile foreign powers. There are people who would kill both of you to make sure that information never surfaces again. Sarah sank back onto her couch, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what she was hearing. Why didn't she tell me? Why didn't she prepare me for this? Because she hoped it would never happen. Elena believed that maintaining her cover perfectly would keep you both safe indefinitely. She never wanted you to live with the knowledge that you were connected to this world. But now I am connected to it. Rodriguez nodded grimly. Now you're the only person who can help us find her. Elena left specific instructions about where she would go if she had to disappear suddenly. She encoded that information in ways that only someone who grew up with her would understand. Sarah looked at the photos scattered across her coffee table. Images of a grandmother she had never known existed, living a life of secrets and danger while raising a child with infinite patience and love. What kind of instructions? Stories she told you, games you played together, places she took you when you were young. Elena was too smart to leave written records, but she spent years preparing you without you even knowing it. Rodriguez gathered the documents back into her folder. She turned your childhood memories into a map that only you can read. The sound of a helicopter growing louder outside interrupted their conversation. Rodriguez moved quickly to the window, her hand instinctively moving to her hip, where Sarah now noticed a service weapon. That's our ride, Rodriguez said. We need to leave now. Sarah stood frozen in place. I can't just leave. What about my job, my apartment, my life? Your life as Sarah Martinez, college graduate and corporate analyst, is over, Rodriguez said bluntly. The people looking for Elena know who you are now. Staying here means putting yourself and everyone around you in danger. But I don't know anything about intelligence work or military operations. I can't help you find her. Rodriguez turned from the window, her expression softer, but no less urgent. Sarah, you spent 25 years learning from one of the most brilliant minds in naval intelligence. Elena taught you to observe, to remember details, to solve problems creatively. She taught you to be strong and independent because she knew that someday you might need those skills to survive. The helicopter noise was directly overhead now, and through her window, Sarah could see neighbors emerging from their houses to stare at the military aircraft landing in the small park across the street. The normal world she had known that morning was disappearing before her eyes. What happens if I say no? Then Elena dies, and eventually so do you. The people looking for her won't stop until they eliminate everyone who might possess the information she carries. Rodriguez moved toward the door. And, Sarah, there's something else. Elena wasn't just a random intelligence operative. She was part of a program that identified and neutralized sleeper agents from multiple foreign powers. Some of those agents are still active, still embedded in American society, still waiting for orders. How many people are we talking about? We estimate at least 50 active foreign operatives that Elena helped identify, but who were never arrested because taking them down would have revealed her cover. They've been operating freely for decades, gathering intelligence and waiting for activation. Sarah felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders like a physical burden. And my grandmother knows who they are. Elena has the most complete intelligence picture of foreign operative networks on the West Coast that anyone in our government possesses. In the wrong hands, that information could compromise national security on a scale we've never seen. The helicopter had landed, and through her window, Sarah could see armed personnel taking positions around the park. Her quiet neighborhood was becoming a military staging area, and she was at the center of it all. I need to pack something, Sarah said finally. Rodriguez shook her head. No time. We have everything you'll need at the base. Sarah looked around her apartment one last time, at the life she had built with careful planning and steady work. Her grandmother's photo sat on the kitchen table next to the cardboard box from Peterson Industries. Two reminders of how quickly everything could change. She thought about the woman who had raised her with such love and patience, who had sung Spanish lullabies and taught her to sew, and never once revealed the extraordinary life she had lived before becoming a grandmother. Will I ever be able to come back? Rodriguez's pause was answer enough. That depends on what we find when we locate Elena, and what condition she's in when we find her. Sarah walked to the kitchen table and picked up her grandmother's photo, slipping it into her pocket. Then, she turned to Rodriguez with as much courage as she could gather. All right, she said. Let's go find my grandmother. Rodriguez opened the door and motioned for Sarah to follow. Welcome to the world Elena spent 25 years trying to protect you from. As they stepped outside, Sarah felt the rotor wash from the Navy helicopter whipping her hair around her face. Neighbors stood in their doorways, phones raised to record the surreal scene unfolding in their quiet suburb. Sarah wondered what they would think when they realized that the woman they had known as a friendly neighbor had been connected to military secrets that could change their understanding of the world around them. The helicopter crew helped Sarah into the aircraft, providing her with a headset and safety harness. As they lifted off, she watched her apartment building shrink below them until it became just another anonymous structure in a city that suddenly seemed full of hidden dangers and secret lives. Through the headset, Rodriguez's voice crackled with static. Flight time to Whidbey Island is 30 minutes. I'll use that time to brief you on what Elena taught you without you realizing it. Sarah nodded. Though her mind was reeling with questions, she wasn't sure she was ready to hear answered. Below them, Seattle spread out like a map she had thought she knew, but which now seemed to contain mysteries and dangers she had never imagined. As the helicopter banked west toward the naval base, Sarah closed her eyes and tried to remember her grandmother's voice singing the Spanish lullabies that had comforted her through childhood nightmares. She wondered if Elena had known even then that someday Sarah would need to find courage she didn't know she possessed to enter a world where nothing was what it seemed, and the people you trusted most carried the deepest secrets. Naval Air Station Whidbey Island emerged from the mist like a fortress rising from the sea. Sarah had never seen a military installation up close, and the scale of it overwhelmed her. Runways stretching into the distance, massive aircraft hangars, and buildings that spoke of purpose and power beyond anything in her civilian experience. The helicopter touched down on a landing pad marked with official Navy insignia, and Sarah found herself surrounded by personnel who moved with the kind of coordinated precision that came from years of training. Rodriguez helped her down from the aircraft, and Sarah noticed how every person they passed acknowledged the lieutenant commander with crisp salutes and respectful nods. "This way," Rodriguez said, leading Sarah toward a low concrete building that looked like it had been designed more for function than appearance. "We'll start with what Elena taught you, and work backward from there." Inside, the building revealed itself to be far more sophisticated than its exterior suggested. Sarah glimpsed computer terminals, communications equipment, and wall-mounted screens displaying what appeared to be satellite imagery of Seattle and the surrounding area. Men and women in various uniforms moved between workstations with focused intensity. Rodriguez led Sarah into a small conference room furnished with a metal table, 2 chairs, and a whiteboard that was already covered with photos, maps, and handwritten notes. Sarah recognized some of the images. They were surveillance photos of her grandmother taken over the past several weeks. "Elena knew this day might come," Rodriguez said, closing the door behind them. "For the past 25 years, she's been preparing you to help us if it did." Sarah stared at the whiteboard, trying to process the idea that her entire childhood had been a form of intelligence training. How could she prepare me for something I knew nothing about? Rodriguez pulled out a thick folder and opened it to reveal pages covered with Elena's handwriting. She kept detailed records of every story she told you, every game you played, every place she took you. Elena believed that if you ever needed to find her in an emergency, your memories would be the key. What kind of memories? Start with the stories. Elena told you stories about her childhood in Puerto Rico, didn't she? Stories about specific places and people? Sarah nodded slowly. She used to tell me about a house by the water where her family lived and about her uncle who worked on boats. But I thought those were just family stories. Rodriguez picked up a red marker and drew a rough map of the Puget Sound region on the whiteboard. Those stories weren't about Puerto Rico, Sarah. They were about safe houses and contacts here in Washington. Elena was teaching you a network of locations and people that only she and her closest colleagues knew about. But she described tropical beaches and palm trees. Elena was a master of misdirection. She took real locations and contacts and disguised them in stories that would seem innocent to anyone listening, but that would make sense to you if you ever needed to use them. Rodriguez marked several points on her map. The house by the water wasn't in Puerto Rico. It was a Navy safe house on Bainbridge Island. Her uncle who worked on boats was Lieutenant Commander James Morrison, Elena's former partner, who now runs a maritime security operation out of Port Townsend. Sarah felt dizzy as her childhood memories began to take on new meaning. "Are you saying that every story she told me was actually intelligence information?" "Not every story, but many of them. Elena was too smart to overwhelm you with coded information. So she mixed real family history with operational intelligence. The trick is figuring out which is which." Rodriguez turned to face Sarah directly. "Think about the games you played together. Did Elena ever teach you memory games or puzzles?" Sarah's mind drifted back to lazy afternoons in her grandmother's small apartment, working on elaborate jigsaw puzzles and playing games that Elena claimed would make her smarter. "She taught me to memorize long sequences of numbers by turning them into stories," she said was a trick her father taught her for remembering addresses and phone numbers. "Numbers that are still in your memory right now," Rodriguez said with satisfaction. Elena embedded contact codes and location coordinates in number sequences that she trained you to remember as stories. "You're saying I've been carrying around intelligence codes for 20 years without knowing it?" Exactly. Elena knew that if her cover was blown, traditional communication methods would be compromised. But no one would suspect that her granddaughter's childhood memories contained operational intelligence. Rodriguez handed Sarah a pad of paper. "I need you to write down every number sequence Elena taught you to memorize. Phone numbers, addresses, even social security numbers or bank account numbers she might have mentioned." Sarah began writing, surprised by how clearly the sequences came back to her. Elena had made it into a game, challenging Sarah to remember longer and more complex combinations. She had praised Sarah's memory and made her feel proud of her ability to recall details that other children might forget. 17 sequences, Sarah said finally, looking at the list she had created. Some of them are probably real phone numbers or addresses, but I have no idea which ones. Rodriguez took the paper and began entering the numbers into a computer terminal. Within minutes, patterns began emerging on the screen. Some sequences matched current contact codes for Navy intelligence personnel, while others corresponded to coordinates for locations throughout the Pacific Northwest. "Your grandmother was brilliant," Rodriguez said with genuine admiration. "She created a backup communication network using your memory as the storage system. But why didn't she just write this information down and hide it somewhere? Because written records can be found, stolen, or destroyed. But memories that are embedded as childhood stories and games become part of who you are. Elena bet that even if something happened to her, you would remember her lessons forever." A knock on the door interrupted their conversation. A young officer entered and handed Rodriguez a sealed message. Sarah watched the lieutenant commander's expression grow grim as she read the contents. "What is it?" Rodriguez looked up from the message. "We've located Elena's bus. It was found abandoned near Mount Vernon, about 60 miles north of Seattle. No passengers, no driver, no signs of struggle." Sarah felt her heart sink. "What does that mean?" "It means whoever took her was professional enough to clear the scene without leaving evidence. But it also means Elena might have had time to implement her own emergency procedures." Rodriguez stood up and moved to the whiteboard. "Tell me about the places Elena took you when you were young. Not just in Seattle, but anywhere within a few hours' drive." Sarah closed her eyes, trying to recall childhood trips that had seemed like simple outings but might have been something more. "She took me camping in the Olympics several times. Always to the same campground, even though I wanted to try different places." "Which campground?" "Solduc. She said it was where her family used to vacation when she was young." Sarah paused, realizing the pattern. But that was another story, wasn't it? Her family never vacationed in Washington. Rodriguez marked the location on her map. Solduc is 40 miles from where the bus was found. Elena might have headed there if she managed to escape during the transfer. But how would she get there? She doesn't have a car. Elena spent decades moving through hostile territory without detection. If anyone could disappear into the wilderness and make it to a predetermined safe location, it would be her. Rodriguez gathered up the papers from their session. "We're going to Solduc, but first, I need you to understand something about what we might find." Sarah braced herself for more bad news. Elena is 78 years old. She's been living as a civilian for 25 years. Even if she managed to escape, she may not be in good condition when we find her. And if she didn't escape, Rodriguez let the implication hang in the air. "Understand. I also need you to understand that once we leave this base, you're entering an active operation. The people who took Elena are professionals, and they won't hesitate to eliminate anyone who gets in their way. If I tell you to do something, you do it immediately and without question. Your life may depend on it." Sarah nodded, though the reality of what Rodriguez was saying felt surreal. 24 hours ago, her biggest concern had been a presentation deadline. Now she was preparing to enter what sounded like a military operation to rescue a grandmother who had lived a secret life as a Navy intelligence operative. Rodriguez led Sarah out of the conference room and down a corridor lined with offices and equipment rooms. They stopped at a supply depot where Sarah was fitted with military-style clothing, hiking boots, and a field jacket that seemed designed for serious outdoor conditions. "One more thing," Rodriguez said as Sarah laced up the boots. "Elena left specific instructions about what to tell you if this situation ever arose. She wanted you to know that every choice she made was to protect you, and that she never wanted you to be part of this world. But I am part of it now." "Yes, you are." "And Elena also wanted you to know that if that ever happened, you should trust your instincts. She said she spent 25 years training you to think like an intelligence operative without you realizing it. All those times she asked you to observe people and remember details, all those games where you had to figure out patterns and solve puzzles, that was her way of developing your analytical skills. Sarah thought about her career at Peterson Industries, how she had been naturally good at analyzing complex problems and finding solutions that others missed. She was training me to think like her. Exactly. Elena believed that intelligence work is mostly about observation, memory, and logical thinking. She spent your entire childhood developing those skills in you. They left the supply building and walked toward a parking area where a black SUV waited with its engine running. Two other vehicles flanked it, and Sarah could see armed personnel in each one. The operation to find her grandmother was clearly larger and more serious than she had imagined. As they climbed into the SUV, Rodriguez handed Sarah a communications headset and a GPS device. These will keep us in contact with base operations. If something happens to me, you follow the GPS coordinates to the nearest Navy facility and tell them your grandmother's operational code name. What was her code name? Nightingale. Elena Vasquez was Navy Intelligence Operative Nightingale for 25 years. Sarah put on the headset and tested the connection. Through the static, she could hear radio chatter from other vehicles in their convoy and updates from the base communication center. The voices were calm and professional, but Sarah detected an undercurrent of urgency that made her stomach tighten with anxiety. As their convoy left the naval base and headed north toward the Olympic Peninsula, Sarah watched the Washington landscape roll past the windows. Dense forests, small towns, and winding roads that seemed peaceful and ordinary. But Rodriguez's warnings echoed in her mind, reminding her that somewhere in this seemingly innocent countryside, people were playing a dangerous game where the stakes were life and death. Rodriguez, Sarah said through her headset, "When we find my grandmother, what happens next? Do we all just go back to our normal lives?" The lieutenant commander was quiet for several moments before responding. "Sarah, there's no going back to normal life for any of us. Elena's capture means that her entire network has been compromised. Every safe house, every contact, every operational procedure she knew is now potentially known by hostile forces. What does that mean for me? It means you're going to have to learn very quickly how to live in a world where nothing is what it seems, and trust is a luxury you can't afford." Sarah watched the forest grow thicker as they drove deeper into the Olympics. The afternoon sun was beginning to sink toward the horizon, and she realized that by nightfall, she would either have found her grandmother or discovered that the woman who had raised her was gone forever. Either way, the quiet life of Sarah Martinez, corporate analyst, was over. Through her headset, she heard the convoy leader announce that they were 20 minutes from Soulful. Sarah closed her eyes and tried to remember her grandmother's voice telling stories about magical places where families could be safe and people looked out for each other. She hoped that somewhere in the wilderness ahead, Elena was remembering those same stories and finding the strength to survive until help could reach her. Soulful Campground lay nestled in a valley surrounded by towering evergreens and the sound of rushing water from the nearby hot springs. As their convoy approached the entrance, Sarah felt a strange mixture of nostalgia and fear. This place held some of her happiest childhood memories. Camping trips where Elena had taught her to identify birds and plants, to navigate by the stars, and to move quietly through the forest without disturbing the wildlife. Now those innocent adventures took on darker meaning. Elena hadn't been teaching her outdoor skills for fun. She had been preparing her granddaughter for survival. Rodriguez spoke quietly in her radio as their vehicles pulled into the campground's main parking area. "Base, this is Retrieval Team Alpha. We've arrived at Soulful. Initial sweep shows no obvious signs of hostile activity." Sarah looked around the familiar landscape with new eyes. The campground appeared normal. A few RVs scattered through the sites, families setting up tents, children playing near the river. But Rodriguez and her team moved with tactical precision, and Sarah noticed they were all scanning the tree line for threats she couldn't see. "Where exactly did Elena bring you when you camped here?" Rodriguez asked, pulling out a detailed topographical map of the area. Sarah pointed to a section of the map near the hot springs. Site 37. She said it was her favorite because it was close to the water, but far enough from other campers to have privacy. Rodriguez studied the location and made notes on her map. "Smart choice. That site has multiple escape routes and good sight lines in all directions. If Elena made it here, that's where she would go." They left the vehicles with a two-man security team and began hiking toward the campsite. Sarah had walked this trail dozens of times as a child, but now every shadow and sound seemed potentially dangerous. Rodriguez moved ahead of her with professional caution, one hand never far from her weapon. Site 37 was empty, but Rodriguez immediately began searching the area with focused intensity. "Look for anything that seems out of place," she told Sarah. "Elena would have left signs that would make sense to you, but not to anyone else." Sarah walked through the campsite, trying to remember how it had looked during their visits. The fire ring was cold and empty. The picnic table showed normal wear from years of use, and the surrounding trees looked exactly as she remembered. But something felt different, though she couldn't identify what. "The rocks," Sarah said suddenly. "There's a pattern in the rocks around the fire ring that wasn't there before." Rodriguez hurried over to examine what Sarah had noticed. Someone had arranged several medium-sized stones in a seemingly random pattern around the edge of the fire ring. To a casual observer, it would look like normal campfire preparation, but Sarah recognized something familiar in the arrangement. "It's the constellation game," Sarah whispered. "Elena used to make patterns with rocks and have me identify what constellation they represented." Rodriguez knelt beside the stones, studying their positions. "What constellation is this?" Sarah traced the pattern with her finger, remembering countless nights when Elena had helped her learn the stars. "Cassiopeia." Elena said it was her favorite because it never disappears from the northern sky. "No matter where you are or what time of year it is, you can always find Cassiopeia if you know how to look." "Direction marker," Rodriguez said with satisfaction. "Elena is telling us which way she went." They followed the direction indicated by the stone constellation, moving deeper into the forest along what appeared to be an animal trail. Rodriguez moved with military stealth, and Sarah tried to copy her silent footwork, remembering Elena's lessons about moving through the woods without making noise. After 20 minutes of careful hiking, they reached a small clearing where another message waited. This time, Elena had arranged fallen branches in a pattern that Sarah immediately recognized. "The arrow game," Sarah said. "We used to play this when I was little. Elena would make arrows out of sticks, and I had to follow them like a treasure hunt." The branch arrow pointed toward a rocky outcropping that offered natural shelter from view. As they approached it, Rodriguez held up her hand for silence. She pulled out a small device that Sarah realized was some kind of listening equipment, scanning for sounds of human activity. "Someone's been here recently," Rodriguez whispered. "Boot prints in the mud, and the vegetation has been disturbed by more than one person." Sarah's heart rate increased. Elena, and at least two others. The question is whether she came here willingly or as a prisoner. Rodriguez studied the ground around the rocky shelter. "The good news is there's no sign of struggle. The bad news is there's no sign of Elena either." They searched the area thoroughly, finding evidence that people had rested there, but no indication of where they had gone next. Sarah was beginning to feel desperate when she noticed something carved into the bark of a large cedar tree. "Rodriguez, look at this." The carving was subtle, just a few lines that could have been random scratches made by animals or camping tools. But Sarah recognized the pattern immediately. "It's our family symbol," she said, tracing the lines with her finger. "Elena used to draw this when she signed birthday cards or left me notes. She said it represented 3 generations of strong women, her mother, herself, and me." Rodriguez examined the carving carefully. "How old is this?" "Fresh. The bark is still wet with sap." Sarah looked around the clearing with renewed hope. Elena was here recently, and she was free enough to leave a message, which means she either escaped her captors or convinced them she was cooperating while buying time. Rodriguez pulled out her radio. Base, this is Alpha Team. We found evidence that Nightingale was at Seoul Duk within the last few hours. She appears to have been mobile and alert. The radio crackled with a response that made Rodriguez's expression grow tense. Alpha Team, we have new intelligence. Satellite surveillance shows a group of vehicles left the Seoul Duk area approximately 2 hours ago, heading east toward Hurricane Ridge. Sarah felt her stomach drop. Hurricane Ridge was a high alpine area in Olympic National Park, beautiful but remote and dangerous. If Elena was being taken there, it suggested her captors were planning something final. Why Hurricane Ridge? Sarah asked, as they began hiking quickly back toward their vehicles. Remote location, multiple escape routes, and if something goes wrong, it would be easy to make people disappear permanently in that wilderness. Rodriguez's voice was grim. Elena might have convinced them she was willing to cooperate, but they're taking her somewhere they can control the situation completely. The drive to Hurricane Ridge took nearly 2 hours on winding mountain roads that climbed steadily through dense forest toward the alpine zone above the tree line. Sarah had been there once as a child, on a summer camping trip when Elena had wanted to show her the wildflower meadows that bloomed briefly at high elevation. As they climbed higher, Sarah remembered that trip differently. Elena had spent hours teaching her about mountain navigation, how to read weather patterns, and what to do if she ever got lost in high country. At the time, it had seemed like ordinary outdoor education. Now, Sarah realized Elena had been preparing her for exactly this kind of situation. Tell me about your visit to Hurricane Ridge, Rodriguez said as their convoy navigated a particularly steep section of road. What did Elena show you there? The visitor center, the wildflower meadows, and something she called the secret place. Sarah tried to recall details that had seemed unimportant at the time. She took me off the main trails to a rocky area where she said few people ever went. Can you find it again? Sarah closed her eyes, trying to visualize the route Elena had taken. I think so. It was about a mile from the visitor center, but we didn't follow the marked trails. Elena knew shortcuts through areas that looked like wilderness. As they approached Hurricane Ridge, Rodriguez received another radio update that made the urgency of their situation clear. Alpha Team, we have visual confirmation of vehicles at Hurricane Ridge Visitor Center. At least 6 individuals, possibly armed, holding position near the main overlook area. 6 people against our team of 8, Rodriguez murmured. But they have Elena, which means we can't use standard tactical approaches. The visitor center parking area was nearly empty when they arrived, just a few cars belonging to late-season tourists and the vehicles that satellite surveillance had identified. Rodriguez deployed her team with military precision, surrounding the area while maintaining enough distance to avoid detection. Through binoculars, Sarah could see a group of people near the main observation deck that overlooked the mountains and valleys below. Even at distance, she recognized one figure sitting apart from the others. That's Elena, she whispered to Rodriguez. She's alive. But for how long? Rodriguez studied the situation through her own binoculars. They're positioned where they can see anyone approaching from the main access routes. Classic defensive positioning. Sarah watched her grandmother through the binoculars, noting how Elena sat with apparent calm despite being surrounded by her captors. Even from a distance, there was something about her posture that suggested she was alert and planning rather than defeated. She's stalling them, Sarah realized. Elena is buying time for us to find her. Buying time for what? Sarah lowered the binoculars, understanding flooding through her as childhood memories took on new significance. Elena brought me here to show me the secret place, but that wasn't really why we came. She was showing me an escape route. What kind of escape route? There's a hidden trail that leads down the backside of the ridge to a Forest Service road. Elena said it was used by park rangers and researchers who needed to access remote areas without using the main visitor facilities. Sarah felt pieces clicking together in her mind. She's waiting for dark. Elena is going to use the escape route she showed me 15 years ago. Rodriguez, check her watch. Sunset is in 40 minutes. If Elena makes a run for it in the dark, her captors will either pursue her into dangerous terrain or decide to cut their losses and eliminate her before leaving. Can your team intercept them before that happens? Not without risking Elena's life. 6 armed hostiles in a defensive position with a hostage is not a scenario that ends well for the hostage. Rodriguez considered their options. But if Elena creates a distraction by attempting to escape, that might give us the opening we need. Sarah stared at her grandmother through the binoculars, willing Elena to somehow sense that help was nearby. As she watched, Elena stood up slowly and walked toward the edge of the observation deck, apparently to look at the mountain views. But Sarah noticed that Elena's movement put her closer to the trailhead that led to the secret escape route. She knows we're here, Sarah said with sudden certainty. Elena has spotted our team. Rodriguez quickly scanned the area with her own binoculars. How can you tell? Because she's positioning herself for the escape attempt. Elena is getting ready to run, which means she knows backup is in place. Sarah felt a mixture of pride and fear as she watched her 78-year-old grandmother prepare to risk everything on a desperate escape through mountain wilderness in approaching darkness. Through her radio headset, Sarah heard Rodriguez coordinating with her team as they prepared for what was about to become a high-stakes rescue operation in some of the most unforgiving terrain in Washington state. The woman who had raised her with bedtime stories and patient homework help was about to demonstrate why she had been one of the Navy's most effective intelligence operatives. As the sun began to sink toward the Olympic Mountains, casting long shadows across Hurricane Ridge, Sarah realized that the next few minutes would determine whether she would ever see her grandmother again. The mountain air grew cold as the sun disappeared behind the Olympic peaks, casting Hurricane Ridge into the kind of alpine twilight that could be beautiful or treacherous depending on your circumstances. Sarah watched through binoculars as Elena continued to move casually around the observation deck, apparently admiring the view while actually positioning herself for an escape attempt that would require every skill she had learned in 25 years of intelligence work. Rodriguez spoke quietly into her radio, coordinating with team members who had moved into positions around the visitor center area. All units, Nightingale is preparing to move. When she makes her attempt, we go immediately. Priority is her safety above all else. Sarah could barely breathe as she watched her grandmother. Elena appeared calm and unhurried, but Sarah recognized the subtle signs of someone preparing for action. The way Elena tested her footing, checked the positions of her captors, and measured distances with her eyes. Even at 78, Lieutenant Elena Vasquez was still an operative. She's going to move in the next 60 seconds, Sarah whispered to Rodriguez. I can tell by the way she's breathing and shifting her weight. Rodriguez looked at Sarah with surprise. How can you possibly know that? Because Elena taught me to read people's body language. She made it into a game when I was little. We would sit in parks or restaurants, and she would have me guess what people were thinking or planning based on how they moved and positioned themselves. Sarah kept her eyes on her grandmother. She was training me to do exactly what I'm doing right now. As if responding to Sarah's prediction, Elena suddenly stumbled near the edge of the observation deck, appearing to lose her balance. 2 of her captors moved quickly to help her, breaking their formation and creating the opening she had been waiting for. In one fluid motion, Elena pushed off from the deck railing and sprinted toward the trailhead with speed that belied her age. For a moment, her captors seemed stunned by the sudden move. Then, shouts erupted from the group as they realized their prisoner was escaping. All units, go now, Rodriguez commanded through her radio. Sarah watched in amazement as Rodriguez's team moved with coordinated precision from multiple directions. The captors found themselves surrounded before they could organize a pursuit of Elena, and within minutes, the situation at the observation deck was under Navy control. But Elena had disappeared into the mountain wilderness, following a trail that was dangerous enough in daylight and potentially deadly after dark. We need to find her before she gets too far down that trail, Rodriguez said, gathering her team for pursuit. Elena may have escaped, but she's 78 years old moving through alpine terrain in the dark. She won't survive long without help. Sarah had been thinking the same thing. I know the trail she took. Elena showed it to me when I was 12, and I have a good memory for terrain. Absolutely not. You're a civilian with no tactical training. But I'm the only person here who knows where Elena is going, Sarah argued. The secret place she showed me isn't on any Park Service map. It's a natural shelter about a mile down the backside of the ridge, near a small creek. Elena will head there to wait for rescue, because she knows I would remember it. Rodriguez considered this, clearly torn between keeping Sarah safe and needing her knowledge to find Elena quickly. The trail Elena took is barely maintained and extremely dangerous in the dark. People have died on less challenging routes in these mountains. Then, we better hurry, Sarah said, checking the flashlight and emergency supplies Rodriguez had given her. Because if Elena is injured or lost out there, every minute matters. Rodriguez made the command decision. Two-person team. You guide, I follow. Everyone else secures the area and maintains radio contact. She handed Sarah a GPS device and an emergency beacon. If something happens to me, you activate that beacon and follow the GPS coordinates back to the staging area. They began the descent down Elena's escape route as full darkness settled over Hurricane Ridge. The trail was narrow and rocky, winding through alpine meadows and stands of mountain hemlock that seemed to absorb their flashlight beams. Sarah tried to remember Elena's instructions from years ago about reading the terrain and staying oriented in mountain wilderness. Your grandmother really taught you all this when you were a child? Rodriguez asked as they carefully navigated a particularly steep section of trail. Elena said that knowledge was the only thing no one could ever take away from you, Sarah replied, using her flashlight to identify landmarks she remembered from their childhood hike. She taught me that being prepared meant understanding your environment well enough to survive in it. After 45 minutes of careful hiking, Sarah began to recognize features that indicated they were approaching Elena's destination. A distinctive rock formation, the sound of running water, and the scent of alpine fir trees that Elena had taught her to identify by smell alone. The shelter is just ahead, Sarah whispered. It's a natural cave formed by fallen boulders, hidden from view unless you know exactly where to look. They approached the area cautiously, with Rodriguez leading and Sarah providing directions. The sound of the creek masked any noise Elena might make, but it also meant they couldn't hear if she was in distress. Rodriguez held up her hand for silence and used hand signals to indicate they should approach the shelter from different angles. Sarah had never been part of the tactical operation, but Elena's training and observation and movement served her well as she positioned herself where she could see the cave entrance. Elena. Rodriguez called softly. It's Lieutenant Commander Rodriguez, United States Navy. Sarah is with me. For a moment, there was no response. Then, Elena's voice came from inside the rocky shelter, weak but unmistakably alive. About time you found me. I was beginning to wonder if you had forgotten everything I taught you about mountain navigation. Sarah felt tears of relief streaming down her face as she rushed toward the cave entrance. Elena was sitting against the back wall of the shelter, favoring her left ankle and looking exhausted but alert. Abuela, Sarah said, embracing her grandmother carefully. Are you hurt? Twisted ankle when I made my dramatic escape, but nothing that won't heal. Elena looked at Rodriguez with professional assessment. I assume you secure the hostels? All 6 in custody, Rodriguez confirmed. How did you know we were coming? Elena smiled with satisfaction. Because I trained my granddaughter well enough that she would be able to decode the messages I left, and I knew the Navy was smart enough to bring her along to interpret them. Sarah helped Elena to her feet, supporting her injured ankle. Abuela, why didn't you tell me about your real life? Why did you keep it secret for so long? Elena's expression grew serious as they began the slow journey back up the mountain trail. Because I hoped you would never need to know. I wanted you to have a normal life, free from the complications and dangers of my past. But I didn't need to know. If Rodriguez hadn't been able to find me today, what would have happened to you? Then I would have accepted the consequences of my choices, Elena said simply. I lived my entire adult life making decisions based on what would keep you safe. I wasn't about to change that policy at 78. The hike back to Hurricane Ridge took nearly 2 hours with Elena's injury slowing their progress. Rodriguez's team maintained radio contact throughout the ascent, coordinating with medical personnel who were waiting at the visitor center. By the time they reached the top, Elena was exhausted, but still maintaining the composure that had served her through decades of intelligence work. As Elena was being examined by Navy medical personnel, Rodriguez pulled Sarah aside for a conversation that would determine the rest of her life. The people who took Elena were part of a foreign intelligence network that's been operating on the West Coast for over 30 years, Rodriguez explained. Elena's capture was intended to extract information about American naval operations that could compromise national security. Did they get what they were looking for? Elena gave them enough genuine information to keep them from torturing her, but nothing that will actually damage our operations. However, her cover is now completely blown. She can never return to her previous life. Sarah had been expecting this news, but it still hit her hard. What happens to her now? Elena will be relocated to a secure facility where she can live safely under Navy protection. Her intelligence debriefing alone will take months, and there are dozens of cases from her active years that may need to be reopened. Rodriguez paused. The question is, what happens to you? What do you mean? You've been exposed to classified information and operational procedures. You've demonstrated analytical skills and tactical thinking that make you valuable to naval intelligence. And most importantly, you're the only person Elena completely trusts. Rodriguez studied Sarah's face in the glow of the emergency lights. We're offering you a position. Sarah stared at the lieutenant commander in disbelief. You want me to join the Navy? We want you to join naval intelligence, specifically as Elena's liaison and debriefing coordinator. Your grandmother has agreed to share everything she knows about foreign operative networks, but only if you're involved in the process. Sarah looked across the parking area where Elena was arguing with a Navy doctor about whether she needed to be transported to a hospital. Even injured and exhausted, her grandmother would still try to control her circumstances and protect the people around her. What would that mean for my life? Rodriguez was honest. It means Sarah Martinez, corporate analyst, disappears permanently. It means living under military protection while you help us unravel 30 years of intelligence that Elena has stored in her memory. It means learning to think and operate like the intelligence professional Elena trained you to be without realizing it. Sarah thought about her apartment, her job at Peterson Industries, and the quiet life she had built with careful planning and steady work. All of it was gone regardless of what choice she made now. The people who had come looking for Elena would not forget about her granddaughter. How long would this assignment last? Minimum 2 years for Elena's complete debriefing. After that, you could choose to continue with naval intelligence or be relocated with a new civilian identity. Rodriguez's expression softened. Sarah, Elena spent 25 years preparing you for this choice without either of you knowing it. Every skill she taught you, every lesson about observation and analysis and problem solving, it was all preparation for the possibility that someday you might need to join her world. Sarah walked over where Elena was finally, allowing the medical team to examine her ankle. Her grandmother looked up with eyes that held decades of secrets and the wisdom that came from a lifetime of difficult choices. Mija, Elena said quietly, you don't have to do this. I can handle the debriefing alone. Sarah took her grandmother's hand, thinking about everything that had happened in the past 24 hours. She had lost her job, discovered her family's hidden history, participated in a military rescue operation, and learned that her entire childhood had been preparation for a life she never knew existed. Abuela, Sarah said finally, I spent 25 years learning from the best intelligence operative the Navy ever produced. I think it's time to put that education to use. Elena smiled with pride, and relief. Then, welcome to the family business, Lieutenant Sarah Martinez. 6 months later, Sarah stood in the briefing room of a classified naval facility, wearing the uniform of a naval intelligence officer and preparing to deliver a presentation based on information she and Elena had uncovered during their ongoing debriefing sessions. The woman who had been fired from Peterson Industries for having undisclosed military connections had become one of the Navy's most effective analysts of foreign operative networks. Elena, now fully recovered and living comfortably in a secure facility, served as Sarah's mentor and partner in an intelligence operation that had already resulted in the identification and neutralization of over 30 foreign agents operating throughout the Pacific Northwest. The grandmother who had spent decades protecting her family's secrets was finally sharing her knowledge with people who could use it to protect the country she had served her entire adult life. As Sarah began her briefing to a room full of senior naval officers, she thought about the morning when she had walked into Peterson Industries expecting another routine day at a corporate job. She had lost that life completely, but she had found something better, a purpose that connected her to her family's legacy and skills she never knew she possessed. The woman who had been raised on stories and games that seemed innocent but were actually intelligence training was finally living up to her grandmother's hopes and expectations. Sarah Martinez had discovered that sometimes losing everything you think you want leads to finding everything you never knew you needed. And in a secure facility not far from the briefing room, Elena Vasquez watched her granddaughter's presentation on a closed-circuit monitor, knowing that 25 years of careful preparation had finally achieved its purpose. The legacy of Lieutenant Nightingale would continue in capable hands, and the family tradition of serving something larger than themselves would survive another generation. The story that began with a firing and a mysterious helicopter had become the foundation for a new life built on courage, intelligence, and the kind of love that prepares someone for challenges they don't even know they'll face. Sarah had learned that family secrets aren't always about shame or protection. Sometimes they're about preparing the people you love for greatness they don't know they're capable of achieving. As Sarah concluded her briefing and fielded questions from officers who had decades more experience than she did, she realized that she was exactly where she belonged, carrying forward a legacy of service that had been passed down through 3 generations of strong women who refused to let fear determine the boundaries of their lives. The helicopter that had arrived at Peterson Industries 6 months ago hadn't just ended one story. It had begun another, one that would continue as long as people were willing to sacrifice their comfort and safety to protect others. And Sarah Martinez, granddaughter of Lieutenant Elena Vasquez, had finally found her place in that continuing story.